Welcome to the Dance Science Podcast. I'm your host, the Dance Scientist, and the Dance Science Podcast intends to build connections and drive discussion on how we can improve our field and make dance science more normalized. Thank you for being here today, and please enjoy today's episode. Hi everyone, thank you again for being here with me today. I'm your host, the Dance Scientist, and today is episode number 36. We're going to be having our 19th guest speaker, which is very exciting. Her name is Cindy Ambridge, and she is a dance and consent specialist. Very exciting. You're going to be the first. Yeah, you're definitely the first one in building into this community. So this is going to be exciting.
Yes,
for our community to learn about.
Consent is quite new.
And I'm glad that you're going to be talking about it today because, again, nobody has talked about it yet on my podcast, so this is going to be great. So thank you for being here today. Okay, so first, Cindy's just going to tell us a little bit about becoming a dance and consent specialist, maybe like how her journey in dance led her up to that point.
Mm-hmm. So I actually started quite late in dance. I didn't start till I was maybe 13. And so to still be involved in dance, I'll be approaching 50 very soon, I do have to think, wow, like out of all of the students at the dance school that I went to, it's a surprise to me that I'm still involved. But back then in Australia here, we would, as a student, study all genres, tap, jazz, ballet. When I finished high school, then went on to audition and was lucky enough to get booked and get some jobs and build networks, really. And I think the industry works where if you know someone, you do a job, you have a good work ethic, you're likely to maybe have a positive outcome if they've got some job opportunities. So I did dance professionally for about 16 years and did things like corporate work, cabaret shows, a lot of theme park work, which was kind of fun, and also worked in Vegas for a while. So if you're an Australian, to dance overseas, and particularly in the US, is like a big deal because it's really quite hard to get a green card and whatnot. So that was like, wow, yes, I've kind of made it. But before I went over to the US, I actually was on a working holiday in Canada and didn't have those networks and ended up thinking, what am I going to do when I finish performing and not have those networks anymore? So I had a decision to make. I had studied psychology at university, so was thinking, do I go back into psychology? That would have been maybe 2 years worth of study to become a registered psychologist, or because I love dance, do I continue in that pathway? But I didn't really want to open a studio. I think it's very difficult financially to be a studio owner. So I was thinking maybe I go into education. So in Australia, to become a high school teacher, you need to do 2 degrees. So I did an education degree and a creative industries degree. And so started a journey into high school teaching, which I feel has been really good to just learn holistically about dance, because you have to understand choreography, you have to better understand performance terminology, history, how to analyze dances. So I really enjoyed that journey. And then through being experienced in teaching, which is now currently about 17 years, I have also worked with some of our curriculum bodies in Australia. So writing a little bit of curriculum. We in Australia only recently have had a national curriculum. Up until then, every state and territory had slightly different. And so I did a little bit of writing for where I'm in, which is Queensland, Australia. And they were some resources that Queensland teachers could use to help them in aligning with the Australian curriculum. And we also have processes here where we have to check the senior assessment before it's distributed to students, just to make sure that it's accessible, that it's relevant, that it's meeting the requirements. So I've done a few things like that. And then I guess somewhere along the way, and I don't really know why or how, but I started a little bit of yoga. I think it was over the Christmas holidays. So again, in Australia, we're, opposite end of the earth,
Yeah.
really, and our Christmas holidays are over our big summer vacation. So you have 5 or 6 weeks off, and I wasn't teaching, it was school break, and I wasn't moving enough. So I found a 30-day challenge, and at the end of it was like, I was kind of angry that I'd never been shown that type of movement before in my dance journey, because I think there's so many similarities in terms of what we aim for physically in yoga. It's becoming stronger, it's becoming flexible, it's becoming mobile, but the approach is so different. There's such a mindset focus, and the approach is to really nurture the body rather than punish it.
Yeah.
If you look in dance, I mean, we have partner stretching, and so when you have a partner stretching, they cannot feel what is going on in a dancer's body. So there's this disconnect between connecting to your body, I feel sometimes in dance. Yoga looks at a philosophy where you close your eyes and you go inwards rather than let's look at the mirror and get a perfect technique.
Right.
It's listening to the messages of your body, not ignoring pain or thinking that you've got to be really in pain to be achieving things like that.
Right.
And for me, the big one was learning about breath and how important that is physically and mentally. So I guess really like the science part of yoga. I don't feel that because I haven't grown up within the culture that created yoga that I can teach or necessarily want or need to teach the philosophy. So I draw on basically the science aspect. So I started including that sort of stuff in my warm-ups, and students really loved it, particularly around exam time. They would be stressed and they'd say, can you do one of those classes that you do? And I'm a person, I like to know the why. So I was not really happy to just use my knowledge that I gained from my classes. So I ended up getting my teacher qualifications so that I could do it, I guess, properly, really.
I mean, that's...
So that's where I started Class for the Heart, which is, as I said, those scientific aspects, things like breath, understanding more proprioception, posture and how it impacts mood, using stillness, mindfulness, mental fitness focus, really. And I guess that's sort of one thing in terms of my dance that I do. But recently, I've moved into consent work, which is a fairly new role within the industry. I hadn't heard about it, over 2 years ago. But essentially, it's working with consent and boundary protocols within the performing arts. So in the film and television world, it's called intimacy coordination. I prefer to use, because I'm working with teenagers, if I'm doing any workshops, I use the word consent, because intimacy can be a little bit like, people have a giggle. But essentially it works where you as a person, you're a third person. So you're trying to alleviate the power imbalances that naturally occur in all situations, but definitely within the performing arts. There's a creative hierarchy that happens. And if you look at dance students, there's a lot of layers of power. You are the adult in the room if you're teaching them. You are the expert. They may really like you as a person. You may be the connection to the industry thereafter. So it's really hard to speak up sometimes. There are students who are more forthright, but it can be really difficult. So being a third person in place, particularly when it's film and television or theatre, which is where it's more so than dance at the moment, you basically try and understand the creative vision of the director or the producer or the choreographer. You take that to cast and you find out what their concerns are, what their issues are, and they have an opportunity to talk to that third person and let them know. And then you collaborate with costumes, the, first AD if you're on a film set or TV, and ensuring processes where there's any sort of body contact or heightened content, that there's only the people in the space that need to be. I know here in Australia, for example, one of our ballet companies used an intimacy coordinator, or it's called a director if it's for live theatre, because they were doing Romeo and Juliet. So there's close contact.
A lot.
And I myself, if I go and I look at concerts where there's a pre-professional year, you do see a lot of close contact.
It's a lot in ballet, yeah.
Yeah, and there's nothing really in place, I don't think, at the moment. One, for those moments where it may be of a romantic intent, and so there is that closeness, but two, just general sort of consent around being touched. So, so I have, I guess, seen that there are some dancers who have crossed into this role, and I've, I guess, secretly always wanted to work in film and television. I was always a child that watched the behind the scenes footage and just love the idea of working in film. So for the last year and a half, I've been training in getting some certification happening, and so far have been really lucky. I've worked on some shorts, musicals, a little TVC project, and being a teacher, when you see the processes, I think it's really important to bring that into the high school setting and the private studio setting, because it's real world, it's industry standard, and it's where the industry is slowly heading. But better yet, it's teaching young people about consent, which is super important for life, really. So that is how I'm where I am now.
I love it. I think what happens with dance, since it's such like it is really like a physical language, I think people assume that the consent is just implied from day one, right? But really it's something that we shouldn't assume is just applied, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think if you look at advertisements often for a dance studio, you will see the picture on the website or the Instagram where there's a teacher and they might just have their hands on a student's hands when they're in a ballet fit,
or foot or something. Yeah,
it's just part of what you assume happens when you go into dance. And I know it's the same if you look at drama, which it's from my teaching experience. I've taught both. You see advertisements for even private theatre companies, but any professional development. And again, you'll see close contact between actors as well. And it just becomes, the assumption that that is what happens when you are in that kind of a field. It's just to be assumed. And I know myself, I've never had a traumatic experience, but I do remember when I was young having been picked to do some partner work, and it felt a bit awkward and weird. But there was no conversation about it. No one was intentionally trying to make me feel uncomfortable, but it's just awkward stuff when you are in contact with someone that you don't or wouldn't naturally have that type of contact with.
Right.
And so it is good to have processes in place. And in this role, a lot of people make the analogy between stunt work, which is very physical in film and television. And so naturally in dance, there is choreography that happens, and it's to the music, and we know movement by movement what it is. But that is actually being brought into theatre and film and television, where everything is meticulously choreographed so that everyone knows what to expect. There's no surprises. And it's, I'm sure, a better process for performers to feel as though they know what the expectations are.
And that even another thing I was thinking about too is if they aren't comfortable, if they feel comfortable enough to speak up, That's another thing to think about, right? Like if they're comfortable in their environment. Yeah.
And I think with consent, the important thing to understand is often you'll see this idea of it's permission, but really consent it's continuous. It's way more than permission. It's ongoing. So even if someone says, yes, I consent to being touched in this way today in the partner work choreography, that doesn't mean that in a week's time that's okay. Things can come up and we never know what someone is dealing with and whether a particular touch could trigger them, or they've just had some sort of injury or surgery like stitches. And I think as dancers, we are often not completely honest about where we're at, because it's this idea of you suffer for your art. Right. And if you're dedicated, you push through and you never take time off, you work through injuries. So it is starting to address that culture, which is fantastic.
And then, you know, sometimes with the power imbalance, if they're not comfortable enough, maybe they have like a little bit of like a harsh teacher that they don't want to go up to and tell that they're comfortable. Maybe they're more comfortable going up to someone like you, who is this consent coordinator, right? Because you're kind of a little bit of like separated from the situation, right? If you're not necessarily their teacher.
I guess if you look at that idea of working with a ballet company or working on film and television, you don't have power over cast. You're not going to be at the next audition, you're sort of like this neutral person. Right. I mean, just as I mentioned earlier, there's always power at play, but you're not in the creative hierarchy of a director or a producer. There's still creativity that can go into the role depending on how those people wish to work. Sometimes it's you will be asked to create the choreography as that consent person, but more often than not, it's we have a vision and you're just assisting and supporting as needed. So I think in dance, it's a little bit separate in terms of, yes, there's going to be those moments where certain choreography, it would be really good to have a third person in there talking, depending on the intent of the piece. But in everyday class, I still do think there are processes that can be brought in around things like touch, costuming, what's posted on social media of a person and the camera angle that is captured, how long people rehearse to, just this idea of having conversations and communicating and not just assuming that that's just how dance is.
Right.
And we just all have to accept it and put up with it, because if we love it, that's what we'll do.
Right. We should suffer, right? Which is just crazy to think about.
Yeah.
So I would really love to hear, like, could you give like a specific example? You were talking about things that like studios could be doing like on a daily basis for classes and stuff like that for like maintaining communication better. Could you give like maybe one specific example?
Well, you just said communication. See, that is the key aspect of consent, is actually having conversations, and it could be at the beginning of the year where you talk about the fact that some people may want a physical touch in terms of how they're corrected, but there could be other people that do not wish that, or the fact that it is okay to communicate if your level of comfort with that touch changes.
Right.
You could do things like have a drawing of a body, and students could colour in areas where this is a little bit of a, I'm not sure about that.
Oh, that's a fun idea.
Yep, this is absolutely fine. But again, I think it's that ongoing communication around, is it okay? And having some sort of a process where you're checking in, and in terms of the teacher communicating, letting students know before they touch what type of touch. Like, is it going to be an open hand? I think usually it's preferred that there is an open hand or a palm, letting a student know maybe the reason for that touch, but also checking in with an open-ended question. So if you ask something like, are you okay with this?
Right.
You're asking a yes/no answer.
Right.
You want some freedom. So saying something like, how would you feel if I put my hand on your knee to attempt to show you how you can activate that muscle, or something like that.
Yeah.
And
So
I think understanding also that there are other options. For me, coming from the high school background, that I wasn't very, I didn't use a lot of touch.
Yeah, I don't really
And
either.
yeah, and when I look back at it, it's kind of, I myself am reinforcing the culture in a sense, because I always thought there's a mixture of students. There are some who
Different
they
learning
go to dance,
styles. Yeah.
they get the process.
Yeah.
There are some students who don't do any dance apart from here at school, so they don't understand the process. So I'll just be completely hands off. And in my mind, it was reinforcing that idea that I'm not quite doing it properly, so to speak. And again, that idea that we spoke about, that if you're doing it properly, you're going to be touched. And when I do think about it, realize that I actually prefer not to be in contact, because you're getting a dancer to, say, move a body part and put it into a position or work on their alignment themselves. They're not relying on you as a teacher and this external force to get them into a position. And I actually think it's a lot more valuable. And I think you do have to be a little bit more creative with imagery and things like that, instead of just poke, move, shove.
Force their knee into,
Yes. Yeah. And I definitely think it is safer, because that connection of the body and the dancer knowing internally what's going on, you as an external not knowing.
Right.
So conversation, communication, and continually checking in, not assuming that it's okay.
Right. Not assuming
because
that
they were okay
Monday.
Yeah.
Because it could be different every day, is what you're saying too. Yeah.
And emotion can really impact on physical touch and what that does. So,
or if they're more stressed from school, more stress from school, lots of homework
they can
one
actually
night.
be like, just don't touch me.
Yeah.
So even things like having students stand in different rows. You know, if you're okay with some instructional touch, then stand in this row. If you're not, stand in that row. If you're at the bar, pick different bars. You could put scrunchies. I know in a yoga space, often they'll have a little dot which says, yes, I am, or no, I'm not open to any sort of manipulation or touch. So there's lots of ways to create that ongoing, very explicit asking of, how are you feeling about some touch today?
Right.
And of course, choreography would be a completely different thing. I mean, if I think back to that situation, it was a really exciting thing to be picked for that duo, but a process and the idea of consent is that you know ahead of time. When you're asked in the space, there's the pressure.
Right.
Because
you're like, oh, sure, I'm fine. Yeah.
Yeah, and there could be everyone watching in the room. Yeah. So any sort of special, I think, contact, particularly between dancers themselves, where it's maybe longer and there's a meaning, there's an intent other than it's to assist your dance skill.
Right.
I think that's when there's a whole bunch of other processes where having conversations before you ask them in the space. Just front loading, are you interested in doing a duo with someone? And knowing what it is that you would ask of them. So to be informed so they can consent. That's one of the processes is before you can truly consent, you've got to know what you're consenting to. So knowing the choreography, which is sometimes difficult because you have to be more planned. There are some choreographers who like to just create in the space, which is still possible, but sharing with your dancers the vision that you have, the type of touch, to allow them to have time to think about it and to discuss or come to you or someone else that you might allocate as that third person any sort of concerns or issues. And of course, having in the space and in a rehearsal, if someone is really keen to be in that duo, having processes where at any time they can create a pause moment, they can clarify questions, they can re-establish a boundary if something's coming up for them and they no longer wish touch to be in a particular area. And also something interesting, and it I guess blends with the well-being aspect from the class for the heart aspect that I teach, is closure and having processes to sort of separate a dancer in space, and it's almost like you're working, and then when you leave a studio, leave a space, there's a separation. And so there are some nice processes in place where people can kind of shake off the role that they've been in. So, I know I see at a Stedford's, for example, contemporary routines, and there's quite intense themes. It could be someone has passed away, or there is suicide, or there is illness. Like, that's quite intense for anyone to be dealing with. And if you're a person who's recently experienced something like that, that can be really intense. So bringing in some closure type practices where people are taken through, it's almost like a cool down, but it's more not like for the body, it's for the mind and the heart, really.
I love that. So how do you kind of see this progressing dance science? You can kind of angle this however you want to, because I know you do a lot of the consent work currently, but...
So I think the science of how much the mind and body is connected. And I think in our Western world, we tend to really separate. If you look at Eastern movement like Tai Chi and yoga, there's the breath, there's the movement. It's holistic. It's about mind and body. I think in dance, there's such a body focus. And we're more than just what fits into the leotard or the costume. We are a whole human being, not a human doing. So I think having a better understanding of how emotion impacts the body. If you have that idea of the fire alarm goes off at night, you know that the sympathetic nervous system is activated, where your pupils are going to dilate and there's rapid breath and muscles constrict, and that's, from a science perspective, it's helping us. And so that also happens when we're feeling a little bit angry or jealous and things like that. And so just understanding the emotional impact of performing choreography that is intense or being touched in a way that's not comfortable with you. There's a science behind the reaction of the body and how that impacts us. It's not just an emotional thing and let's forget about it. There's a wonderful book that I'm reading at the moment, and it's called The Body Keeps the Score. And so that is going all into how trauma is stored within our body. Yeah. And I think there's a rise of somatics as well that we're hearing and that's being spoken about. And just, again, it's the knowledge. It's not just, well, I want to touch someone because that's just what I've always done. It's understanding that scientifically, physiologically, from a scientific perspective, there's things that you're doing as a result of that. And so we have to go cautiously and not just be, that's just how it is.
And, like more student-centered, right? Not around what the teacher wants. Yeah.
Yes.
What the student
and again,
needs.
I think it's similar maybe in the US. Am I correct in saying that there is no regulation here in Australia with dance? Apart from a police check, that's all you need to teach in a studio. In a high school, it's university education, but that lack of regulation, I think, impacts on how much people know. I know you and I share very similar perspectives in terms of it's outdated traditions.
Abuse.
But what's a shame is there's also not a culture in the dance world of going and having professional development. So for me to maintain my teacher registration, when I was working full-time in a school, I had to complete a certain number of professional development hours in order to maintain registration. And so I've always just been a person that I love learning. And I go into a bit of a, deep dive, rabbit warren, YouTubing, podcasting, everything, just to gain knowledge. And I wish that was part of the dance industry culture, not this, well, I've done 1,000 workshops and warm-ups, so I now can teach that. Right. And now that I've been a teacher for 5 years, I don't have to do any more learning. I'm just doing it, So I definitely wish professional development was something that more teachers sought out. I think it could be improving, and I think with the online things, the access and the opportunity is getting better.
Yeah.
But it would be something I wish that was happening more.
And I think it's hard too because quality teachers like us kind of get lost in the mix sometimes, and we have to be hi, we're here, we're doing quality work, when some of the lower quality instruction is out there, right? Because it's so easy to just teach dance, right? I mean, anyone can teach dance here, at least anyone can teach dance. So
and I think it's also this idea that if you're a fantastic dancer, you're a great teacher, which is completely different,
right?
And I know my daughter, she dances, and I will ask her after she's gone to special 3-day workshops where there's, teachers from all over Australia coming together, and I'm always asking her about what feedback did you get? And often it's there's nothing about that. It's just a combination, and it's choreography. There's no fine tuning of any sort of technique. Even in corner work, you might have, 2 people across the room, and she'll say, no, I didn't get told anything. And I'm like, that's crazy, because I, even at that level where I was teaching in high school, and people aren't going to aspire to perform professionally, there's still an opportunity to provide feedback for every single person, and it can take a word where you just say, hands, shoulders down. It can be so quick, and so it, I think, surprises me that, not surprises, I guess it's back to that, there's no regulation, there's no education required. So the actual process of teaching, providing feedback, it's just you do what your teachers did, rather than, I come from a place of knowledge and that's where my choices are based in. Is an article I read about what's beneficial for students and the feedback and how I give it. So...
And, I really think anyone can benefit from ballet and dance, regardless of their technique, regardless of their body. I don't care if they're recreational. I don't care if they dance 1 day a week. I don't care if they dance 20 classes a week, right? They can all benefit from a quality teacher. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's your job, is to teach and, help them improve. I mean, there's so many benefits of dance. Yeah. In terms of the discipline and the working as a team and
motor skills,
perseverance. But you are also there to do a job and to hopefully facilitate some improvements so people can reach their level, their potential.
Right. Regardless of, how many days they dance a week, right? Regardless of their talent. Yeah. So I think that's really important. So what have you learned that you wish you knew as a young dancer?
I definitely think more about the body, anatomy and things like that. We in dance don't really talk about that stuff. The music is on, you follow along. And so definitely I wish I knew more about the body and that I actually was more curious myself. Relation to that, stretching isn't painful, a big one. When I teach my workshops, I have students stand up and they physically put themselves in one side of the room if they think true, one side false. And the question is stretching painful? And they all move to the true. And I explain to them, you're actually working against your body and the proprioception. And it's like when you go to the doctor and they ask you, what sort of pain level are you at? If it's a 10 out of a 10 or a 4 out of a 10, and I always say you should feel a sensation, a 3 out of a 10 when you stretch. And you're stretching, like you're doing the job that you're trying to do. So definitely that, but breath, like I feel breath is so undertaught.
It really is.
Didn't for many, many years teach myself using breath. I don't recall breath being something that you spoke about. And it's funny, another thing I do in my workshops, I have students go into a plank pose or a développé into second, and I get them to hold it, and then I say, are you breathing? And no one's breathing. Okay. And so I try to explain how important it is, not just to the oxygenation of the body, which is what we need to give our muscles in order to have better stamina, but it's so good for core strength. It's the only way that you can truly activate the core. It is going to help you with your flexibility through relaxation, but where I come from is your breath is the key to your emotional state and feeling really nice and calm. And it's crazy to think that we actually, many of us, don't breathe how we're meant to breathe.
Yep.
It should be in the belly area, which I think, again, this is something you and I both teach, is that idea of if you're sucking in, you're not accessing your full breath.
I talk about
but
that.
That's often the cue that we're given is, belly to spine even. And I hear that a lot in yoga classes as well. When you're thinking belly to spine, you're not allowing your breath to move, then you're missing out on all those things I just mentioned.
Diaphragm can't move.
So definitely breath. I think that is a big one. In terms of tapping more into the consent stuff, I guess the philosophy with the consent work in the performing arts is that we are more equals, that we are as important as the teacher. They need us to teach a class. They need us if they're going to put a routine on the stage and build a reputation. In terms of a choreographer, they need us as the bodies in the space. So just feeling maybe more of a collaboration would have been good. And I didn't have any negative experiences at all. I think I was lucky, but I think that would be a nice mindset moving forward to teach our young dancers is we can learn from each other. It's not I'm the expert, I know everything. You can teach me things as well.
Yeah, that's a really big thing in somatics too, is like viewing the teacher as like a facilitator or like a guide, not necessarily as like the hierarchy.
And
then
because you know what feels right. It's interesting. I did a PD a couple of years ago, but it was with a dance physio, and she was mentioning the fact that, and I had taught that for a long time, is this parallel and toes forward, and there can be slight variation based on obviously the anatomy of the hip, that might not be exactly what feels nice. And so if you as a teacher, and I did, are talking about that parallel and toes forward like the train track, that may not necessarily feel really nice, and with a slight adjustment it can just feel so much better for the dancer. And I think we tend to sometimes just be like from a physical aesthetic focus rather than the feel, and that's why I like that yoga philosophy so much and what I try and teach. Like, close your eyes, connect. What is it feeling like in your body? You've got to listen to those things, not ignore it. So, yeah.
And I think it's nice too, because you brought up like the parallel alignment thing that and I mean, I've taught that for years, so it's funny that you mentioned that too, but I like that you gave an example of even you keep challenging your own pedagogy, like you continue to challenge yourself and like,
Yes.
oh, I taught that for years. Maybe I need to revisit that,
Yes.
I think that's like really the base of a good educator.
Yeah. I remember at university, one thing that they said to us was, you're a lifelong learner. So that is what I've always thought about. And even with my university degree in education and dance, I still walked away doing things just like my teachers had done. And I never felt comfortable, even though we did one maybe anatomy unit, I never felt comfortable with terminology and knowing my why. Like, why would I choose to tell a student to contract one muscle so it relaxes the other in opposition? I just didn't know the why. And so it's been sort of my own little mission to find out for myself. And so now students can ask me why I'm saying a certain thing, and I have a reason, not just cause. Like, that's, that's just what we do.
Right. Or just because I said so, right?
Yeah. And it's interesting, even with this consent work that I'm doing, so the certification for that, there's a lot of learning, and you train through a chosen organisation. But I've sort of done double the hours of training, just tapping into other organisations, because there is so much to learn. I sometimes feel like if I had my time again in terms of dance, I'd be a dance physio, or I'd go into physiotherapy to really understand the body. It's like there's so much to learn, and it can be overwhelming at times that you don't know enough, but I think the intention is there. And as I mentioned before, it would be so good for our industry if we all started to pursue that more, if we're not already, not just be like, yeah, I'm done, I'm the expert, I know it. And it's a question again in my workshop where I talk about anatomy and knowledge, and I ask students, who is teaching at their studio, assisting? Is anyone actually going and trying to find out about the body or anything? And the answer is no. And I tell them, it's not your fault. It's the culture that we're in, but we can make a change.
Yeah, I mean,
we're dealing with bodies here, and there can be long-term permanent damage if we don't. Like, my daughter has just started teaching at her local studio, so I'm like sitting her down and sharing with her just little things about, this is what you've got to be careful of, and I would not be touching and pushing. Their bones haven't developed fully yet, and just always, they know what they're capable of. Don't push them, and she, I think, knows how to hold herself out of splits and things like that, because she is aware being pushed is not a great thing. And she is, like we talked the power dynamics before, she is not probably at that level where she's going to say, I don't wish for you to push me in this.
And
because of that.
And another thing too is like just movement demands are so much higher now. I don't know if I assume it's the same in Australia too, but dancers are being asked to do, 8 pirouettes,
Yes, it is crazy.
Everything is more.
I look back to when I danced. Yeah, it's nothing like then.
Single or double pirouette was like 40 years ago.
and there's some, not all, but I think we went through a phase here in Australia, and probably taken from what happens in the US. I think we look to the US a lot. But there was a time when everyone did like 10 wet A turns.
Yeah.
That's kind of gone away. I think we're slowly getting back into, it's just dance. But there is still that idea of it's trick and it's not so much dance. There's this fusion of rhythmic gymnastics or gymnastics. And I watched an Eisteddfod one time, and there was, waiting for the adjudicator. So they had some improv for 20 seconds on stage, put some music on, and every 8-year-old
was
did
doing
tricks.
Yeah.
No one just danced.
That's the unfortunate part. Is bled a little bit too much, in my opinion. Yeah.
Yes.
That's the hard part.
And the thing is, I know, and it's what I try and, again, say to students, you go and have a look at a musical, a music video where people are dancing, an MTV music show, no one's doing the stuff like that. So there's this disconnect between the industry and the training.
The artistry.
There's just this, it looks good and you might win a competition. And so maybe, I know I've listened to other podcasts and, interviews and read articles about adjudicators and judges and the role that they can play in being a change for the industry.
Yeah, I've actually met a lot of great ones in the United States. Yeah.
Honestly. I like the ones who have the comment at the end. They don't just... In Australia, there's obviously like individual voice critiques and people get those back, but some adjudicators just go straight to, this is the place result, that's it.
Oh, really?
Other adjudicators, I really like it when
we
they
get
say,
voice ones.
This is what I'm looking for, and this is what's a focus of me, and they may publicly make a comment to, teachers, be aware of XYZ. That's what I like.
Yeah, we've had a lot of positive experiences with the studio that I teach at, with competitions, with adjudicators who are positive, motivating, encouraging, and actually give good critiques, to be honest. Like really, really good, really great things.
Yeah.
So yeah.
From that teacher perspective, I have to mark assessment, not just teach and put on a routine at the end of the year. So when you're marking, you have to tap into the technical skills, the more expressive skills. You're using terminology. You're actually trying to provide feedback. So the next time they have a performance task, they have something to work with. I've listened to critiques where that's lovely this, lovely that. And you're like, no, tell the person where it's at. How can they go from one level to the next?
I mean, it's their job. I mean, that's their
but
job
again,
at that
I
moment.
think there's not necessarily a regulation.
Right.
It's you're known as a dancer, or you're pretty well known in the teaching circuit.
Right. So they should be a good adjudicator, right?
Yeah. But where is the training in the teaching and the feedback aspect?
There really should be like a screen, maybe, I don't know if there really is like a screening process for adjudicators. That would be interesting.
I don't think there is. In Australia, we've started to see a few organisations where there is a training process and then you're mentored by someone, which I think is really positive.
I mean, yeah, that's better than nothing.
But a lot of people, it's just, you're known for your dance skill. Right. You're a working dancer, so you can come and adjudicate.
Right. Because they've proved their value, but just in the dance perspective, right? Not necessarily adjudicating is different.
Yeah, totally.
It's a different hat.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for part 1.
Excellent.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to part 2. Now, Cindy is going to tell us a little bit more specifically about what she does as a dance and consent specialist.
So currently I am mostly teaching workshops, so studios, high schools. From my class for the heart, it is that well-being focus, trying to teach dancers the fact that you can do both. You can build the skills for dance in terms of your strength, your flexibility, your mobility, fine-tuning alignment by understanding a little bit more about your body, but in a way that you actually walk out and go, That felt really nice. Often students, after I've taught them, we go through theory first, whether it's about the body, whether it's about mental fitness, and then we do a movement class. And at the end of it, people are yawning and they're tired and they say, I'm really relaxed or I feel tired. I have people who have fallen asleep and I say, that is actually perfect because you are relaxed and calm. And that's the reason that we're doing this. So I do those workshops. I'm in the process of launching a more of an online space because I feel that students, unless you have a teacher who brings me in, there's no access to that sort of stuff. So I'm trying to get an online sort of program happening where students can take a little 10-minute class before bed, and it's a nice, gentle, easy stretch, but it's going to be super relaxing. In terms of my consent work, currently I've done a few workshops in more of the studios that are the triple threat because they understand the theatre aspect and they have people who are likely going to move into musical theatre. So the acting and the roles that they may take on, understanding that this is industry process for musicals.
So they prioritize it.
They see the value in that. I'm presenting at a few conferences. So there's a state dance educators conference, there's a drama conference coming up. So that for me is more so, in terms of dance specific, is more trying to build the awareness of the fact that, yes, it's in drama. Let's not be behind, like I do, without sounding too cynical. It's like the dance world almost seems to be a little bit behind. For example, the sporting world and their use of research and how to get the best potential out of their athletes. So bringing awareness is where I'm at with that sort of stuff. And again, trying to create some online workshops. So I have taught a couple online to people who are interested. But yeah, essentially building awareness because it is such a new thing that some people haven't really even heard about yet for the dance space. Drama more so, but yeah, dance, I think even people who are aware of it in a drama context don't even think, oh, we should bring this into dance. So I guess that's kind of my mission at the moment.
Is to slowly move that needle. It will move eventually. You'll help move that needle.
Has to. And I know so in Australia here, consent has become part of mandatory curriculum in schools, but it's taught in terms of real life relationships and it's taught through the health and physical education curriculum.
I see.
So it's great that consent and that idea is coming up, but it's different in a performing arts context. So enthusiasm is one of the words that is used. There's an acronym that I think it was Planned Parenthood created, and it's FRIES, which is, in order to consent to something, you should be freely giving that consent. You should be able to reverse and revoke that consent at any time. You need to be informed about what it is you're doing. E is the enthusiasm and S is the specifics.
I love that.
That, as I just mentioned, it doesn't really work in other aspects of life and in performing arts. So the analogy I teach students is if you go to the gym, you are uncomfortable and you're building muscle, you might not be overly enthusiastic about the pain that you're about to experience afterwards, but that's going to be some muscle gain, not too much pain, of course, but that enthusiasm might not be there. Or if you go to the dentist, for example, you're not enthusiastic that you're fully consenting. Right. So yeah, I think even though that national curriculum around consent is super important, we are seeing more aspects of students using the word consent, as a joke. It might be, I don't consent to that,
Too freely, too nonchalantly.
Yeah, it's sort of almost making fun of it, but it still is a positive that it's becoming more mainstream.
I mean, at least they're talking about it.
It will just be a time before it is something that, like, it has to be included in private studios, in classes, everywhere.
From day one.
I mean, from a teacher perspective in a high school, there are so many processes already in place. It's, more so probably at that studio level where, some very explicit processes to protect not just the student, but also the teacher.
Yeah. Just the organization too.
Yes, yeah.
So you mentioned that you're hoping to build some online courses, and then what other services do you offer as well?
Well, it is, like I mentioned, sort of mostly the workshop.
Okay.
For students. I do some teacher mentoring as well. I'm super interested in that space, knowing where I was, where I didn't know the anatomy, knowing that as a beginning teacher, you really, there's so much to learn, not just about the safety aspect, but even the behavior management, just little tricks and tips about how to vary warm up, how to control people more in a space, how to give feedback. So teacher mentoring as well, and some sort of one-on-one with students as well who want to, I guess, shift that mindset, because something I haven't talked about is, stress and anxiety is such on the rise. And I think that also is what motivated me to start Class for the Heart, is just, you see students and they're stressed and they're anxious and they don't believe in themselves and they're lacking confidence, and trying to educate any young person, but me working specifically with dancers, that you actually have to put effort into your mental fitness. It's just like your physical fitness. It takes time. It's ongoing. It's lifelong. It's never going to end. Your mental fitness is the same. Sure, there are people who are super confident, but not all of us are like that.
Right.
And so there are things that you can do to build that. Working with dancers one-on-one to shift that mindset and to build confidence, reach their potential, but while they're conditioning for dance and learning a little bit more about their body.
I love that.
I think it's important, and one thing I try and promote is the fact that as a dancer, you can be more in control. You can be more independent of your improvements if you have a little bit of understanding. How do you gradually increase the intensity of an exercise? Is it you increase the lever or the repetitions, or how long you hold it for? So teaching dancers, that they can be more in control.
By just knowing simple things, right?
Yes.
Very simple concepts,
I think it's when you know the philosophy, you can approach that to different things. So one of my pet peeves, for example, is hamstring stretching. And how you see everyone, not everyone, over exaggeration, but how you see so many people that the focus is on, you have to have straight legs and you have to, it's either head to knee or you've got to touch the floor. And what it creates is a real curvature in the spine,
posterior,
and the tucking under of the pelvis.
Yeah.
And the thing that I say to dancers is, look at your body when you're stretching. Everyone has got their shoulders really hunched forward.
Yeah.
And it's then that disconnect again between how we're stretching and conditioning and what it looks like, and then how we want to use it. Our spine, our chest is usually, if we're wanting to do a beautiful kick and a jeté, is broad and open. So why aren't we stretching our hamstrings with a broad and open chest so that the muscle memory is there? And from the emotional aspect, which is the Class for the Heart workshops that I do, our posture is going to impact how we feel. So when we have our shoulders forward and hunched, we're putting ourselves into a protective, sad kind of emotional state. Don't we want to use our confident posture and feel confident and send that message from the body to the mind that we feel good? So even a simple little change like that in how you stretch your hamstrings is going to have the benefit mind and body. So if you understand that with a hamstring stretch, you can then apply that to any sort of stretch. You know, if you're trying to get some flexibility in the side of your body, like let's not shorten one part or one side to lengthen the other. Let's have length in both sides, because if you were doing a beautiful tilt move, that's what you'd want. You'd want extension in your spine. So let's train how we want to dance, and there is such a disconnect there. So yeah, I think teaching young people the theory that then can be applied to all aspects of their body. Yeah, don't get me started on hamstrings.
And again, I mean, you know, you're teaching anatomy in ways that are simple, right? You're not giving an 8-year-old an anatomy textbook, right?
No.
It's not boring. It's not a sit down lecture for an hour, right?
I use a TheraBand, and I put it in my hand, and I just ask students, how do I move this TheraBand, which is like a muscle? How do I move it and lengthen it? I have to move 2 points away from each other. That's what our muscles need to do. So where do they connect to our body? And no one can tell you where your hamstrings are. So I often, it's weird, because I'm used to teaching more visually in a high school setting where you have a projector and a whiteboard, and I do always try and tap into the visual and the verbal, not just I'm going to talk at you.
Right.
So I'm used to projecting images. So I have a little portable projector that I take around to my workshops in private studios, because they don't have usually a visual way for me to display the information. So a simple diagram of the hamstrings, I found some good ones where people have painted the bone and the muscle onto a person's leg. So you see it on a real body. And I also have one where it's just like an anatomy sketch kind of thing, but just showing a simple thing like that so that they know, oh, that's how my body works. And a frustration of mine is social media, really.
That's the kicker.
Yeah, I think we look to how many followers, and then you see the hamstring stretch done like I was just talking, straight leg.
With no certifications.
Pelvis is tucking under, the shoulders are all hunched, but they can take a before and after and go, wow, look at that. But then you look at the alignment of the picture and it's so off, and that's what that teacher is actually promoting, and it's like it demonstrates that lack of knowledge. But because they've got the followers, all these young dancers are out there doing that kind of stuff. And it's why sometimes if I'm posting on social media, I try and do a little bit of anatomy info so that it explains my why. Why am I saying this? And what does it relate to? Not just, here's a little thing, do this and it's going to get you flexible in 2 days. The miracle cure that, does not really exist.
Right. And I mean, if we're going to be, we're prescribing exercises for the body, basically, right? And so I really think it's our responsibility to be open with where, what our certifications are in, what our education is, just anything that anybody has studied. I think it's important to include, because a lot of the accounts I see don't really list anything. So it just, it makes you wonder, do they have any training, or is this just, did it come out of thin air?
I don't think there is a lot of training. Yeah. It's just I danced and I'm good at it, so now I'll teach. And it's surprising because I think here in Australia you have to have, if you teach swimming, for example, there's some sort of swimming certificate. And obviously, okay, if something goes wrong, someone could drown. That's serious. In dance, if something goes super wrong, someone can be permanently injured for the rest of their life and in chronic pain. And I think for me, because I am nearly 50, there's a few little things that I'm noticing in the body. And so I am even more conscious of that idea that, you know, it's not going to be worth it when you're 40 years old and you can't walk upstairs because you're in so much pain. It's not going to be worth the trophy that you won. And I think, you know, you mentioned before that where we're at compared to where we were a long time ago with regards to the skill level, we haven't seen the extent of the injuries in long term.
Definitely
I know physiotherapists are saying they're on the receiving end of what's out there and the damage that is being done. But I think it's going to be another 10, 20 years before people are like, whoa, that's the actual outcome of all of that training in terms of the excessive hours and things like that.
I think it's hard for dancers because they see the quick fix, you know, they see that they can get, you know, they can get their splits in a week or get their splits in a day, right? Of course, in their young brains, you know, they're thinking, oh, nothing's going to happen to me. So I think a little bit of the responsibility falls on us as educators too, you know, showing them like, oh, you know, or maybe telling them they can show you maybe a video that they found online and ask you what they think. Or ask you your opinion, you know?
Because I sort of use the analogy with students. You know, you go on Netflix, you can binge. We're not used to waiting. You know,
we don't wait for anything.
It's not fast enough.
Nothing.
So we are growing up, or they are. I mean, I grew up when there wasn't internet. And then when you had to use dial-up speed and it was so slow. But myself now, even I get impatient when I cannot just watch a show on binge the whole time. Or it's a show that is released an episode every week. We're used to this instantaneous stuff. Yep. And dance is definitely the same. And I sometimes say, like, there's no app that you can get that's just going to get you flexible. And it's let's be patient. And the payoff of patience is or working towards patience is you become more patient, you know. And I guess I sort of, because I go into schools at times, you have dancers from a lot of different studios. When I was teaching at a school permanently, I also had dancers from a lot of different studios. And I would teach, and my philosophy was, for example, the hamstrings. And I would say to students, the difficulty you're going to have is going and being the person who sits more upright. And so you don't have your head to your knee, but you're going to look around the room and it seems as though other people are more flexible than you because they've got their head to their knee. Right. You now know the anatomy of your hamstrings. You now know your connecting floor to dance movement. Are you going to actually be able to do that? Or is that kind of the ego that we all have, is that going to creep in? And I say, if a teacher is teaching something different, or if they're hands-on with you, have a conversation in a respectful way. Yeah. Hey, this is what I learned today. My teacher said that, you know, it's better for us to try and maintain a neutral pelvis when we stretch. And if we're tucking under because we're trying to get our head to our knee, that's not really as good and the stretch is going into our back. Like, what do you think about that? And I say, if they don't know or if they don't have an answer for you, then you really have to make that choice. Are you going with that teacher's instruction that is maybe not based on knowledge, or are you going to go on something that is knowledge, or go and do some more research yourself in relation to that? If you don't fully believe me or them, the internet, there is so much, and again, you have to check the sources because lots of stuff can be put on there. But yeah, get curious yourself. It's your body, it's your tool. You wouldn't go to a mechanic who doesn't know anything about engines. Exactly. So don't go to a dance teacher that has no idea or not don't go near at a studio, but ask some questions, and you can help to educate your teacher too.
Yeah, and I mean, you're giving the dancers a respectful way to ask that teacher, maybe why they're doing the hamstring stretch that way, right?
Yeah.
They're not like disrespecting the teacher, they're not like raising their voice,
No, it's and that's what I always say, in a really nice, polite way, share with them and say, like, yeah, guess what? I was shown this today. What do you think?
What's your
It's like,
what's your
clenching of the glute for turnout. I was taught that way, where it was like clench and tuck. And if you're like, the teacher would go and poke to see that there was activation
with a stick.
And I try and tell them, no, like, your glutes are for extending the leg and for jumping, and you're going to take away some of the power. And I try and show a diagram. I used to have one on my wall in my classroom because we would do a ballet unit. And yeah, I have had students who have gone to their teacher and said,
respectfully, right,
this is what I was told today. They've come back and said, no, the teacher said, no, you have to squeeze. And I'm like, did they talk about any muscles? Did they share with you any information? No, that's just what they said. Like, we have to squeeze. Yeah.
And that's the unfortunate part, where it's like, it becomes hard because it's like some people who just have their doors shut, as I like to call it, if their pedagogical door is just shut and they're just kind of closed off, I don't really think anyone can open that door if it's, fastened all the way, locked, let's say, right?
Yeah.
Maybe if it's a little bit open, you can start like getting into people and being like, oh, maybe I'll think about that a different way. But I think it's hard because some people's egos are just in the way.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, they don't want to. Yeah. They're like, I'm fine. What I'm doing is fine. Right? It worked 20 years ago.
And I would use the example of, we used to think the world was flat at one point in time.
Yeah.
Or we used to think smoking when you were pregnant is okay.
Yeah. We smoked in restaurants.
Changes. So when I talk about when do you stretch and how there's that temporary change of the muscle, which reduces a little bit of the power, like, that's a new thing. Share that with your teacher. It's hard to understand, I think, especially, it seems like you and I are both. It's that learning, like, tell me more. How can I do my job better? What is the latest research saying? Like, I don't understand when people don't want to know. I guess sometimes I need to find the balance, because I can talk too much about the how and the why rather than the, let's just do it. But I think it's important to share some of the scientific in a simple way,
right,
to students. Yeah.
So can you maybe offer us one piece of wisdom from anything we've talked about today? Anywhere you want to take with this?
So I would say, purposefully work on your mental health and fitness.
I love that.
On a consistent basis. Because we often turn to doing things like, I'll listen to a little meditation, or I'll go for a walk, or I'll do a bit of colouring or journaling, or whatever it is. We wait until we're at crisis point, which is like, you've got the flu and you're really sick, and so leading up to that point, your diet has been pretty bad, but then you'll try and eat some veggies and go, that's going to be the fix.
Right.
Or you'll have a green juice and think that that's going to fix it all. You have to do it consistently, little bit. That's what's going to be the most beneficial, I think.
And even with their technique, like you said too, it's not just even just like mental skills, right? It also affects how they perform, how they approach learning too, right?
Yeah. So like, there's studies that anxiety and stress increase your injury risk.
Yeah.
And it affects your balance. It's going to affect when is a good time to stretch? If you're stressed and you're anxious and you're angry, your muscles do not release. So there's so many impacts. And yeah, that's really where I try and, or the big picture thing that I'm trying to share with dancers is
Right.
it's good you can do both, and it's so beneficial. It's not just how you feel, but at the end of the day, like how you feel, I think sometimes we're all on this cycle of trying to achieve something, and in dance, it's if I can be front and center, or if I get picked for the solo, or if I win the trophy. And so we set these goals for ourselves, which is really good because you work hard and there's benefit in the discipline. You achieve it and you celebrate it naturally, which is so good. But then it's, oh, what now? I thought that was going to be something that
Motivated.
made me feel better.
Right.
And happiness is not from an external thing.
Right.
You've got to find just contentment within yourself. And that when you spend time inwards and noticing your thoughts and being still, that's when you get clarity about how you are thinking. Are you positive? Are you negative? If you make a mistake, are you really hard on yourself? Are you very forgiving of not being perfect? You've got to go inwards for those things. And that is what can change the criticism that you might have of yourself, or perfectionism, which is so evident in the dance world. Mm. So, yeah, finding time to go inwards, I think, is something that is so important for particularly dance, which is, I think I mentioned before, it's all about the body and what you can do. And we look at ourselves in the mirror. Social media, you're posting your selfies and it's looking at yourself rather than in, which is where, how we go through life is determined by. That's where we either feel joy or happiness or sadness. It's inwards, and understanding that we can have an influence on that. So,
yeah, I think that's really good advice, because then that bleeds into just life skills just in school too, right?
Yes.
Or other activities that they might partake in. Yeah.
And I think that's really like the big, for me, one of my, the best thing is at the end of a workshop where I'm having students move, and then we go into stillness, and then we're still, to bring them out of it, you say, just wiggle your fingers and wiggle your toes, and there's not a lot of movement. They want to stay in that relaxed, calm moment, and they really do, I think, need it. And so the best thing for me is just seeing the emotional state that I can help them get to. And trying to share that at any time you have what you need within you to get to that. I mean, there is obviously conditions where, people do suffer from anxiety and depression and things, but I think there are processes and practices that can help, at the very least, alleviate some of those things.
Right.
But back to what I was saying before, you can't just wait till it's crisis.
Right.
It's this ongoing thing, and bringing in more of a mind body. It's all connected. We're one, not just the body and how we look and what we can do. It's more important how we feel. I think most people, that's what they want, is to feel happy, to feel joy, and it actually takes work, unfortunately, I think. And then it's not all sunshine and lollipops anyway.
That's the thing, is it takes work.
Of course.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much for today's amazing, amazing conversation.
Well, thank you.
All right, to wrap up today's wonderful, wonderful conversation with Cindy, one of the things she said is that, a dancer could be okay with touch one day, and then they can actually change how they feel about that touch the next day, the next month, the next year, right? There are also really simple ways that consent can be communicated by studio owners and by teachers, right? So it's not necessarily just professional companies doing a better job, but it can actually be across the board from studio owners to just educators, even collegiate dancers, right? She also said that she really loves continuously challenging herself and constantly learning, right? She mentioned a lot the importance of professional development and continuously learning and continuously expanding, right? And constantly learning new things, right? Just because we taught something one way doesn't mean that that way is the best way that we can be teaching something, right? She also compared, I really like that she talked about this a lot today because it helps to kind of compare how consent is communicated in theater and TV shows, right? It's kind of this like, there's just this thing that's like taught and included, right? Whereas in the dance world, sometimes these things are just thought to be implied, but they really should not be just implied. You know, there really should be more procedures in place. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Dance Science Podcast. I'm your host, the Dance Scientist, and if you really enjoyed today's episode, please feel free to either leave a review. You can also comment on the episode, or you can also send me a direct message right on Instagram. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to seeing you guys in my next episode.